Okay, it's 3:30, but people still seem to be dribbling in from the copious spread that's out there. So we'll give it maybe just one more minute. Yeah, there are? Oh, interesting. Okay, thank you. Maybe 2 minutes then, we'll see. While you wait, please take the time to check in, as it were, with the funky tool. As I commented earlier, I use Zoom about 8 times a day, and I use this twice a year, so I'm a little rusty. Yes, yes, I was just thinking about that. Who would like to be our favorite person?
So we'd like to get a note taker, if someone would like to do that. And the best thing about taking notes today is that you won't have to do it on Friday, which is a longer session. Nitty, you want to do it? Thank you. You're awesome.
Thank you so much. There are still heroes. Yeah, I'm not concerned today. Do you wanna do Justin first, maybe? Yeah. Just in 5 minutes, whatever. Okay. Maybe 1 more minute. Who am I? Hmm. Hmm. All right, we'll get started in just a moment. Oh no, you have to say something because it still thinks it's me.
Right. Should I just start? All right, hello everyone. Welcome to HTTP-BIS at IETF116. We're having 2 meetings this time. So this is our first session. Our second session will be on Friday morning. This is the shorter of the 2. So first, as with every other session, we do have our note well. These are the terms under which you participate in the IETF. Please familiarize yourself with this if you have not already. And just a couple other, brief notes. Again, if you haven't already checked in to the QR code or joined Mineko, please do that. That's how we keep track of who's in the room, so we can make sure we have the correct size room in the future. We do have our masking policy, so please keep your mask on if you're not actively eating or drinking during the session. See a couple of people with that off, so please get that on if you can. If you're speaking at the mic, you don't need to do that. And anything else administratively? We do have a note taker. Thank you, Nitty. Do you want to pull up the agenda?
Oh, you mean on
Or you want
Oh,
because you're sharing your screen.
sure.
All right. So today on our agenda, we're going to get updates on some of our adopted working group items, on the cookies draft, on our DNS aliases, proxy status header, and unprompted authentication, which was newly adopted. We've also had a request to agenda bash in some time to talk about message signatures. That's something that has already passed through the working group, but it has received some comments during last call that are going to lead to some changes. So we want to get an update on the status there. Is there any other agenda bashing today, or does this look good to people? All right, let's get started. So let's actually start with the quick discussion on signatures and how we're moving forward there. Justin.
All right. No slides because this conversation just happened a few minutes ago. As you may have seen on the list, there's been some discussion about how signatures are can be applied to different use cases and things like that, and particularly some of the advice that we had previously been giving people in some of the examples around signing the value of another signature. As it turns out, that is not advisable for some very fancy math reasons, but been able to have a really productive conversation with the researcher that brought this to our attention, and we believe we've got a solid path forward about how to change the narrative of the examples in both of the cases where we were previously signing a signature in the examples. As it turns out, both of the sections where that occurred, neither of them were actually about signing a signature. The first one was about signing components of a request when you're sending a signed response. So we can do that without even talking about a request signature for the main example. And the second example is signing a reverse proxy, signing a message on its way through. So adding multiple signatures, adding a signature to an existing signed message. We can show both of these without resorting to this whole composed signature thing and the problems that actually can cause in practice. So I'll be updating the examples. There's going to be a PR on that. I will drop a note to the list when that PR is ready. I've already started working on it, so hopefully that'll be available today if I'm lucky, but probably by next week. And Dennis has already offered to help sort of wordsmith the narrative around that so that we are giving people the right advice about some of the sharp edges around here. The last really remaining bit is that there's a couple of places on signatures is that there are a couple of places where we need to be probably a bit more specific about encoding and getting octets out of different pieces. And we're pretty sure that we've got ways to do that. This might technically require some normative changes, but this is more sort of clarification of intent. So I don't think that any of these changes would warrant dropping it back to working group last call. Obviously, the chairs are going to review those changes and make that determination. But I don't think anything that we're doing is going to require sort of regathering consensus around this, because it's really most of what's going on here is pointing out the sharp bits that are not going to go away.
Thanks, Justin. Yeah, I think from my standpoint, what I want to see is we'll have the PRs, people have a look at them. We'll have a new draft. We'll let that sit out there for a few days to make sure that everyone's reasonably happy, but we won't have a formal working group last call or IETF last call unless we or the ADC changes that we think, require that.
Right, of course, that absolutely makes sense.
Yeah, or if there's, of course, some contentious things that come out.
Right, yeah.
Julian, do you want to comment?
Yeah, hello, good morning. I mostly agree with that. I'm a bit concerned about the statement that this is not a normative change, just a clarification, because it absolutely is a normative change. But I agree.
That's not what I said. So I think we'll be all right.
Yeah, I believe it is a normative change, but it is not
Yes.
breaking functional change for anything that people are doing. It is correcting the normative
Yeah.
language. Yeah.
Right. Yep. So somebody will probably have to change an implementation because they made an assumption on the wrong side. I probably will. And but you know, this is the time to fix those bits.
Any questions, any comments beyond that? Sounds good.
All right, thanks.
Thank you, Justin. Thanks for your work on this. And to Annabelle as well. Right. So next up is cookies. I believe Stephen was going to be not remote. Fantastic. And just a reminder for folks who came in later, you do need to be wearing a mask unless you're actively eating or drinking. We don't have exceptions to that, so please make sure you're wearing a mask.
I got it right here.
All right, perfect. Hello, everyone. I'm Stephen Bingler from Google, and I'm one of the cookies editors. I'm also going to start up by apologizing. My allergies are acting up, so if I have to take a break to cough, that's why. All right, 6265 BIS. One of the longer live standards continues to trudge on a little bit longer. Next slide, please. These are all of the changes that went into the -11 draft that we published a few months ago. I'll just leave these on screen for a few moments, and if anybody has any questions, they can ask me at the end. 1, 2, 3. Next slide, please. All right. First off, there's a typo on this slide. There is no -12 draft. That was supposed to be well, that was supposed to say something else. So this is the change that will be going into the upcoming -12 draft. As for this change, it's one that I'm somewhat excited for. We've had some issues in the past with the cookie spec in that it actually describes two sets of requirements, one for servers that generate cookies and one for user agents that consume them and echo them back to the servers. And we've seen problems where implementers will accidentally choose the wrong session and then find that, oops, I'm broken and don't accept the correct cookies. So this adds some hopefully plain English explanations for which section applies to you depending on what you're doing. Next slide, please. All right, these are all of the open issues in scope. We've got about 5. I'll get back to same-site cookies and redirects because I have some more to talk about, but the remaining issues are internal white space and cookie names and values. So a change went in recently, well, 8 months ago, is that still recent? Where there was an attempt to clarify which control characters were and were not allowed in cookies, and H tabs were somewhat unintentionally excluded. A later change put them back in. But it turns out that the Chrome, Firefox, and Safari all treat H tabs internally or differently. And internal here means that in the middle of some non-white space characters, so you have A, H tab, B, that would be an internal H tab. Chrome disallows them entirely. I think Firefox allows them in cookie names only, and Safari allows them in both. So there's no compatibility between the major browsers there. Having looked into it a little bit, I posted a response saying that I have a slight inclination to disallowing internal H tabs, considering that they're not compatible as is, but I'm very interested in any feedback that people want to provide here. The remaining changes are mostly editorial. There's going to be there's an issue to add a summary of all the changes from 6265. I'll do that once everything else is closed. And then there's a couple things that changed in the HTML spec around browser context. So there's an open PR to fix that. And then there's also an open PR to define the term top-level navigation, which we used but never actually defined. Let's see. Once all these open issues are closed, I think 6265 BIS will be ready for working group last call. Coming back to same-site cookies and redirects, this issue is a little bit of context. So Previously, on same site, if you navigated across a redirect chain, we only considered the very first initiator and the final landing site, completely skipping everything in between. That was a problem, and it was fixed in the spec. Chrome tried fixing it in the browser, turned it on, and almost immediately got complaints from websites that we were breaking their workflow. Firefox echoed similar problems. So I'm looking into how we can fix this without breaking these sites. I added some metrics recently, but they weren't as useful as I had hoped. Turns out it's really difficult to know whether a missing cookie is important or not. So if anybody is aware of any specific examples of breakage in this context, I'm very interested. Next slide, please. How am I doing on time?
You're fine.
You're good. We got time.
All right. Next slide.
It takes
It's
a little
going.
while.
It's going.
Okay. Not to rush you. All right. So we've already got work lined up for the next revision of the cookie spec. I won't go into too much detail here, but there's two major pieces of work that are sort of waiting on us to get 6265 out the door. One of which is partition cookies, cookies having independent partition state, also known as chips, as well as the cookie spec layering. For anyone familiar with the cookie spec layering, right now the cookie spec touches a lot of different aspects that are covered by other specs, and it's pretty hand-wavy on it. So we want to disentangle it from other specs, let them do what they're good at, and cookies will handle cookies. That's it for me. Are there any questions?
If you have any questions, please get in the queue. All right, sounds good. So I guess timeline we're thinking here for these updates.
The big question mark here is
Yeah.
how same-site redirect chains get solved or don't get solved.
Mm-hmm.
At minimum, I'm thinking a quarter.
Okay.
So hopefully not too much longer.
So by
By
next
next
IETF,
IETF, hopefully. Fingers crossed.
we're gonna be done here.
Smooth sailing, yeah.
Okay,
Ready to go out the door.
looking forward to that.
6 years later, we all are.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
So next up, we've got Tommy with the next top alias proxy status draft, which we adopted relatively recently still. Yeah, yeah.
Is this the first time since we've adopted, I think?
Possibly. Yeah.
All right. Hello, everyone. There's an interesting Meet Echo thing where you can't be on your phone and a computer at the same time. And so I can't share my slides from my phone without kicking myself out, and then I can't approve myself to share the slides. So here's my remote control. All right. So this is a very small little draft that we adopted recently for adding a extra proxy status parameter, specifically about next hop aliases. So I'm going to start with just some recap of what we're doing here and why we're doing it. So proxy status is a header that we already have that can communicate a ton of different information from a proxy back to the clients about how things are going on the proxy. How did this go? And one of the things it already communicates is the next hop info. And as that was originally defined, that is a single item in the structured field terms. And that item is a name, an alias, or an IP address. It's very open-ended, which is great for many different use cases. However, what it doesn't let us do is have multiple things in here. And there's a specific use case when we would like to know a full CNAME chain that is associated with this next hop, specifically around cases where servers may be doing CNAME cloaking to obfuscate the fact that when you're going to a particular host, either directly or through a proxy, it is CNAMing you and redirecting you over to some known tracker or some server that you want to apply specific policy to. And clients may have specific policy they want to enforce to certain names or IP addresses. And currently just having a single item about the next hop means that the proxy would have to know which name or IP address is interesting, and you don't get a full view of the chain. So to look at this visually, let's say you have a client connecting to a proxy. In this case, it's a forward proxy, but this would work just as well for reverse proxying. You're trying to connect to example.com. The proxy will resolve example.com. Maybe it has a CNAME record. It's actually host.example that has an IP address. And with proxy status as it's defined, you could have a next hop, and maybe you put the IP address in there. But it's also possible that example.com here on the DNS resolver is actually being CNAMEd to tracker.example or something that's more sensitive. And in this case, with the new next hop aliases parameter, you can have alongside your next hop, you could have a list, in which case this is a list of just one string, which is tracker.example. So now you know both the CNAME records as well as the actual address that was used. So it's pretty straightforward. I think most of the document is just explaining kind of the little details around getting this particular field right. The actual parameter definition is, so the name is a next hop aliases. It is defined as a structured field string. Oh, and these are old slides. I had fixed that typo. It's structured field, but I have to re-upload it. And this is a comment-separated list of alias and canonical names that come from the CNAME records. We do define how you do percent encoding escaping in case you have weird characters in your CNAMEs, which doesn't really happen too much in practice, but it could, so we need to handle the case. And we also recently mentioned that the server could include the empty string, in this case, to indicate as a hint to the client that there were no CNAME records or aliases found along the way. So as a status, there are only 2 open issues as of today, and right before this, I finally got down to writing some pull requests for these. So if you go to these issues, please approve the pull requests if they look okay. One is just that we were missing a reference to structured fields, where we were talking about the field name being a string. And the other one is a longer-term discussion of something that Ben Schwartz had brought up, originally as a suggestion to refer to getAtterInfo's AI canon name. It turns out that is not something we want to suggest, because that only gives you the last item in the CNAME chain. So the PR I've put up is adding a kind of implementation consideration section, noting that oftentimes, if you're just running with standard DNS library, getAtterInfo, or similar APIs, you may not have access to the full CNAME chain. So be aware of that. Don't assume that AI canon name is going to give you everything that is there, and mentioning that if you don't have access to the whole thing, you can, of course, include just the one you do have access to, but it's better to have the full thing. So essentially next steps here. Wow, hello. I'll revise the document to include those, and once we get some reviews on it, I'd like to hear if there are any other changes that people think should be made here. Otherwise, we could probably just wrap it up pretty soon. I'd also love to hear from Ben, if he's on the line, if that kind of proposed change for the canon name is appropriate, or if there's other things we want to say. Ben, I've summoned you.
So Ben?
Hey, Ben Schwartz. Yeah, that seems like a fine resolution to me. I think this draft is in good shape. I'll just write you up an issue right now, because the escaping rules, I think, are still not totally right.
Thank you.
We can get.
Great. That's the type of review I want.
Alessandro Gadini, Cloudflare. So we are using this. We we've implemented it. I've had a quick review. It seems perfectly fine. So I'd be after, the open changes, the open issues are fixed, then it should be fine to go to the next phase.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. We do now, I'm aware of 4 independent implementations of this. So we've tested it.
Lucas, and as a reminder, if you're in the room, we'd like you to use the on-site tool on Data Tracker so we can manage the queue with remote and local if possible. Go ahead, Lucas.
Hey, Lucas Pardew, Cloudflare. Just the PR for the AI kind of name. I had a quick review like before the session that you put in there a caveat that you may not put the full chain in if you can't get it. The comment I made on that is that like generally applicable though? Like that you may not put the full chain in for other reasons? Is that something we want to think about and address in any other way? Like I can see the reason you wouldn't want to just arbitrarily not put the full chain in, but it's maybe there are some, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. We could go as far as saying you should include the full chain if you can get it, and the reason that you wouldn't fulfill that should is that you can't get it for some reason. I can't think of any other good reason you would just choose to omit things from this that feels like it's only going to be kind of hostile to the client, and at which point you just wouldn't include this option at all.
Yeah, I think saying you should do it and then painting out the precise reason that we have in the PR about an example why. But if you probably don't want to go too far down it, but if you were to start dropping stuff, is there certain things that you could and still achieve the aims of this header at all, or is that just a complete no-go? Like, what would be the problems of doing that kind of thing?
I think it would still be any hint is useful. So
Okay, cheers.
All right. Thank you. Mark is next.
Chris, why don't you go ahead?
Oh, okay. Sorry.
How do you deal with CNAME cloaking right now if you're not going through a proxy? Like, what is the threat model that you consider?
So today, for example, our libraries, when they do DNS, they are able to look at the full CNAME chain.
So the clients will do DNS and then inspect it and then like make the determination based on that?
Right. So in the process of loading a page, when we do DNS, we'll get the full chain, the IP address, and if any of the names on the chain or the IP address, for example, matches some known list, then we can apply cookie policy, or we'll send it through a relay and say, this is a tracker, etc.
So if like for whatever reason like that DNS resolution process was like subverted, or I don't know, like some entries in the chain were modified, then like whatever implementation you have right now would like that check would not work.
Right. So there are definitely it's a moving target.
Sure.
And so in general, CNAME cloaking is something that we see evolve as a way to hide from being in the name. And there are other techniques that you can do. Once people realize that we're able to look into the CNAMEs, then you can get rid of the CNAMEs entirely, and you just send everything directly to IP addresses, which is harder to manage. And that's why matching against IP addresses is also important. So that's why kind of the goal here is when we're going through the proxy, we want to see the full chain and the IP address, because then you have the full set of information. There's a separate overall challenge is, how do you manage and understand kind of like the list of things that you want to match against?
For sure. So the reason I'm asking these questions is I took a quick look at the security considerations. It says, like, very rightly so, that like this information is only valid insofar as like you trust the proxy that's giving you the information.
Correct.
But I think you might need to say a little bit more about like how that proxy is doing DNS and like what are the implications of like potentially that particular step being
And also
like
the
subverted.
DNS that it is doing that. People,
For example.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So like a slight extension there, and otherwise good to go.
Could you file an issue?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Mark.
Yeah, I was just wondering, you have a syntax there that's a commented delimited list of items in a SF string, correct?
Correct.
Did you consider using an inner list instead?
I think so. Is that possible in the parameter here?
It is. Just
Okay.
because that would mean you would be doing less parsing on your own.
Yeah. Let's talk about it after. I think we looked at it and there was some
Something to think
issue,
about.
but
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Just
we'll confirm that.
the whole idea of SF is to try and make it so you
Yes.
have to define your own project.
Agreed. Okay. All right. I think that's it.
Anyone else? Sounds great. So I think, yes, work through those few issues, have a few more discussions, and then I'd say it sounds like we should be able to do working group last call before the next meeting. I would
That's
think.
what I'm thinking. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
another month or so.
Unless something really pops up. Yeah, it's a small one. All right, thank you. There we go. Okay, David Skenazy, please.
Do you want to drive slides?
Let's see, I clicked the request button.
I'm pretty sure they are. Let's take a look.
I don't see the request.
Oh, there it is. It's a great list of Cloudflare comments you got there in a row. Like 4 in a row.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Right? So my name is David Skenazy, and I'm here to talk about unprompted authentication, which I'm quite pleased to give this talk in room 401. You're welcome. All right. So, oh, no, come back. All right. Quick summary and recap from previously on unprompted authentication. The idea is to have the client authenticate itself to the server, have the ability to use asymmetric cryptography, but in a way that allows the server to hide the fact that it is offering some resources behind authentication. So we presented this at a while back, and we adopted it in the working group last month. And yeah, so how do we do this? Roughly, the core idea is to use a TLS key exporter but instead of generating a key and using it like a key, we just use it as a nonce. And then you sign or you HMAC that nonce. And that gives you the nice property that you don't need to ask the server for a nonce first. All right, so this is something that did change since last IETF. In the past, we were using, so there's still a new header, but we were using a concept of unprompted auth schemes. Ben Schwartz pointed out that, well, why not just use this HTTP auth schemes and define new ones? Because that way you could, in theory, reuse the existing ones. So we decided to do that. So the new header is unprompted authentication, and now the draft defines 2 new HTTP auth schemes. And then you have a key identifier, a signature or hash identifier, and then the signature, which is much longer than that, but it didn't fit on the slide. All right, so that's where we're at. And we have a few issues from the discussion that we had during the adoption call and at the last meeting. So we did some work to resolve the issues that we thought were completely uncontroversial between last working group and now, and we kept the ones that would be either controversial or just fun to chat around with friends, and we have them here. So 2440, one thing we realized, as I was mentioning, there's an identifier in there that the S equals or the H equals, where the goal is to for the client to tell the server, by the way, this is the algorithm that I am using. You know, either I'm signing with ED25519 or I'm HMACing with SHA-512. And we need a way to convey that so the server knows how to verify the signature of the hash. But we also need to have a way for this to be extensible. Let's say if we define a new hash function or a new signature function later on. So initially, when we first did this in the first version of the draft, we just put a no ID in there. And then a few people puked all over the floor. So we cleaned that up and we removed that. And we decided to reuse TLS sign-out registries for signature scheme and hash algorithms. But people rightfully pointed out that RFC 8447 made these orphaned. So that doesn't really preclude them for us from using them, but it kind of means that they're not great to use. So we don't have a clean solution there. Something that Martin proposed was using a registry that's for JSON web algorithms, but it's not like a simple number. Then you have like a string alg with a bunch of details, and it felt kind of heavyweight and not great. So I was thinking maybe we just bite the bullet and define a new INA registry. Registries are cheap. Thoughts, comments? All right, I'm seeing one thumbs up.
We have Jonathan in the queue. Ron.
So Jonathan Hoyland's one of the co-authors of this. I think we should bite the bullet and create a new registry.
Cool, thanks.
Hey, this is Sean Turner. We've got like 3 hash function registries already. There's one called hash function textual names. Can't you just take it over and add a column and call it quits?
Where is this one?
It's in IANA.
Yeah, but can you like get that one more specifically?
Specified RFC 8122. There's other ones as well. So I think you could just pick one, and because that was done by somebody who's not really participating, you take it over, do whatever you want with it. I'll send you a link, all right?
But is it under like TLS or HTTP, or is it somewhere much further away?
Standalone.
Oh,
yeah.
All right, send us a link. We'll
can
take a look.
I'm also, if you don't like that one, I'm also okay with you just using your own. But if we can take one and use it, then let's do that because it'll save you a step.
Okay.
Ben Schwartz. Sometimes it takes a little while.
Yeah, it's just frustrating that he's all the way over there.
Hi.
I'm looking at you because you're on this side. Yeah. Go ahead.
If this is being reopened, I want to support using string values instead of trying to create numeric values for a thing that then is going into a free-form string anyway.
Okay, thanks.
So,
Martin.
Yeah, Martin Thompson. What did we do in Justin's signatures draft for signatures? Because there's 2 things here, right? There's the hashmac version of this one, which if you identify a hash algorithm, you're implicitly binding yourself to using HMAC, which may not be what you want. Maybe you want a generic MAC algorithm registry, which would sort of put the kibosh on what Sean has suggested, despite the fact that I kind of like that idea. So there's that, which is to say that perhaps there's another MAC algorithm that you potentially want to use that's not HMAC, or like CMAC, for instance, which would be used with AES, for instance. And then there's the signature stuff. And if Justin's got a signature registry that's perfectly good and very well specified, then why make a new one for that?
So on signatures, we're actually in good shape. TLS has one.
I know, that's the other thing.
Oh, no, we have too many, so let's create another standard. But so that was one idea. And on signatures, we were fine. On hash, we weren't, because that one got orphaned. And so one thing I was considering was just doing one new registry that does combined signatures and MACs, and then, but that is specific to unprompted authentication.
Can you put none in there as well? Just to be maximally like JSON, JW, whatever it is? That's a joke. But that may actually be a sensible approach, because I was going to ask the obvious question is what happens if you have an S and an H in here?
Yeah. So what I was thinking, and this we'll dig into it a bit more in the next slide, is if we put them together under one registry, then we can get rid of signature and HMAC and only have one new HTTP authentication thing, and that feels kind of cleaner. Julian?
Justin.
Oh, wow, sorry about that.
That's actually the second time today I've been called Julian, so not sure what that means.
Means we're all jet lagged.
Yeah, it is true.
The registry that just got brought up that's for HTTP message signatures is well specified, but it's also very specific to what the inputs and outputs and stuff are. I have not read this draft to know whether or not it would actually be applicable in this case. That said, it does have both digital signatures and Mac-based, key-based Mac type stuff in it. One of the benefits from this, and this is based on input that we got from CFRG, was that the algorithms, as they are, need to be fully specified with all parameters specified. So it's not just RSA PSS, it's RSA PSS with this MFG, with this blah, 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 or MGF, whatever it is. It, like, all the math needs to, like, actually line up in order for this to actually show up in the registry. We also very explicitly did not use the JWA registry from Jose. There are lots of reasons why we didn't, but the main one actually echoes kind of what you were saying, is that those algorithms as they are were defined for sort of a specific other context, and sort of the parameters and assumptions around those contexts. That said, one of the things that we have in HTTP message signatures is we have a section that says, if you want to use a JWA algorithm, here's how to map the inputs and outputs of those defined algorithms to what we need in the on the HTTP side. So it's basically a functional mapping of take these inputs, map them to these outputs, and this is how you plug it together. But we very explicitly do not allow the values of the algorithm names in the registry to, like, correlate. So there is no alg equals RS256 in the HTTP message signature side. That registry exists separate, and that is a deliberate choice. So, not having read this draft, I don't know if a separate registry makes sense there or not. I'd be happy to talk with you about how the wiring works in signatures, in HTTP signatures, and if we can reuse that might be good here. I don't know.
Awesome. Thanks. Well, I'll take an action item to read your draft because I haven't read it either, and then we can realize. And if anyone in the room has read both drafts, come and tell us what you think.
Yeah. And one last point: if you do go down the road of defining something, there actually is an IANA registry for hash algorithms, which is buried, and I had to discover independently for a different draft in order to reference the values there. But there is a list of things that says SHA-256 means this very specific thing from this RFC in this section. So that does exist for those hashes.
Thanks. Can I ask you to drop a link to that in the issue? Or is it linked from your document?
It's linked from a different document, so I will find it for you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Where's the GitHub?
It's the HTTP extensions.
Is it extensions? Okay.
Yes, we do not have 2,440 issues just for this draft. Thank God.
I've been there. I would be no judgment. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
Alex. Hi, Alex Kranowski. I have a very silly question because I feel like I missed something. I understand why asymmetric key signatures exist here. I am a little bit lost as to why we're adding HMAC. And given the very lengthy conversation that we just had about registries for those things, I'm wondering if there's a specific use case, or can we just kill this feature and simplify our problem?
The original version of the draft didn't have that, and there was feedback I got, if I remember correctly, from Ben Schwartz, like, oh, why don't you add HMAC? Someone might need it.
I think that is a terrible idea. I think HMACs require symmetric key, and I think on the web we very rarely have non-ephemeral symmetric key, and I think that this is a huge foot gun. I think we should not be exposing HMAC for this.
That's not unreasonable, because if you have a shared key, you could be just passing it in regular basic auth.
Yeah, and I don't really see the value of this shared secret between the server and the client, because you also, like, this primitive is usually intended for authenticating a shared channel, and if it's like pre-known here, like, I don't think it gives you the right properties.
Fair. Well, I see Ben in the queue, so let's see what his thoughts are.
Hey, yeah, I don't have any objection to that. I think that the point I was trying to make there is now moot because we've moved to this system where unprompted auth can take arbitrary auth schemes. So if you want to use like digest authentication, you can do that. We don't need to define a new scheme.
So would it be okay as a compromise for now to say we don't have to specify this now, someone else can do it in the future?
I'm totally fine with that. Does anyone think that's a bad idea?
Was that a yes or a thumbs up? Thumbs up.
All right.
Thank you.
Because at that point, I would say we just use the I forget which one, because the signature scheme was orphan, but there's a TLS one that's not orphan that has the signature with the right hash for it. Oh, right. Right. So then we could use TLS signature schemes. I think that one's a nice clean fit. Alessandro?
So I guess the solution is you just do signature and you use the existing registry, and then if someone does HMAC, they define their own registry or figure out a different.
Or they write a new draft that.
Yeah. In a new, okay.
I'm just a time check. You've got about 15 minutes left.
All right, thanks.
14 now.
Okay, all right. So let's just do that then. Everyone okay with dropping hash and then just using the TLS signature scheme? All right, I'm getting thumbs up. Let's do that. All right, so little tiny bike shed between the other issues. Chris Wood mentioned, now that we've kind of redesigned it to use regular HTTP authentication schemes, do we actually need to define a new unprompted authentication header? So pulling up the spec in the HTTP semantics document about the authorization header, it says it doesn't need to be prompted. So we could just reuse that and then focus on just defining an authentication scheme. Thoughts? All right, I'm seeing some thumbs up, a lot of not caring. Let's do that then. Yep.
I mean, formally, from the spec standpoint, yeah, that's up to the use of the tools. You know, it's a framework.
Mhm.
You've got 401 and the headers and so forth, and so it's up to you as the scheme designer to decide how you compose them. What I would probably want to double check is, are there any user agents out there when they see a 401 with a scheme that they don't recognize? Do they do something that's not desirable?
Well, in this case, we would never send a 401 with this because the whole point is if you don't have it, oh, sorry, I have no idea what you're talking about, 404.
Then you're probably fine. Yeah. This doesn't cause any concern from an HTTP standpoint then.
Awesome. All right.
I jumped in. So this is more a question to the room, actually, because I don't know some of the history on this. But because we have authorization and proxy authorization, and I imagine some of the time you may want to use unprompted authentication to a proxy.
That's actually an argument for doing that and reusing both those headers, actually.
Right.
That makes
In
sense.
which case, maybe you want to mention, call out that this can be used in both of those.
Yeah, I'll have to think about it.
I'd love
more,
to hear
'cause
kind of the history of why those were fundamentally different, too.
I think it was mainly so like they don't want the proxy one is hop by hop and all that.
Okay. So potentially, not wading into that by just saying, here are the existing ones, and I'm just working with those, maybe cleaner.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Next we have, I believe, Ben.
Hi, Ben Schwartz. So my one concern with this is that if we go back to using the existing authorization header, I want some very clear text here that essentially by prior arrangement, clients are permitted to use any auth scheme in an unprompted fashion. Essentially, you can, in a sense, deliver the 401 out of band. In my view, that's what this whole draft is all about. I I don't want us to be saying, oh, we're defining two new special schemes, and these special schemes are specially allowed to be used unprompted via prior, if it's known via prior arrangement. If there's a prior arrangement, we should be clear that you can use any scheme.
So I see what you're getting at, but no. And so there are some auth schemes, take HOBA, for example, that like go back and forth multiple times and I have a whole thing, and just sending that like unprompted doesn't really make sense. I'm happy to take an action item to look at the simpler ones like basic, like digest. I don't think we have any text saying that those require 401. So I think we're good. And as long as the new scheme we're defining can be sent unprompted, it's the whole point. And as long as the few ones that you were considering, like basic and digest, can, I think we're good, no?
I just want some text to make that clear. I don't want us to end up in sort of an ambiguous state where it's not clear that you're allowed to use basic unprompted.
I don't think it's within this document's purview to say anything about basic with the authorization header.
Well, this is why I'm concerned about this change, because if we have a separate header, then it's clearly within this document's purview to say, and this header can be used unprompted with any auth scheme for which that is technically feasible. And I think that I don't want to lose that if we are moving to an existing header name. And as a technical matter, it shouldn't be a problem. This is just kind of a policy question.
Okay, well, how about this? I'll double check that there is no text banning unprompted for basic and digest. And if there isn't, we're good. And if they are banned, then that puts us more in the having a separate header, so we can do that. But I think that's the dichotomy. If it's already okay to send digest unprompted with authorization, saying in this document, actually, maybe I can quote that text if you want, but I don't think it would be appropriate for this document to add normative on those things.
So to go one more step on this, if we're not defining an unprompted authorization header and we're not clarifying that some existing schemes can be sent unprompted, then I don't even think that draft is titled correctly anymore, because instead what it's defining is like channel-bound authentication schemes. And those schemes happen to be usable unprompted, so are many existing schemes.
So just to check, we've got probably 6 and some bit of a minute left in the meeting. You have a pretty substantial queue right now, and I think you have another issue that you thought this was the small bike shed in between.
Yep.
How do you want to proceed?
How about we clear the people who are in the queue, but if we can keep it short and then we move on. I mean, I did put a bike shed on the slide. That's my fault. I knew this was going to happen. So go ahead, MT.
What? Yeah, it should be red. Sorry, couldn't resist. The point that Ben's asking for, I think, is not a reasonable request to make of you in this document. I think the direction to move to using authorization, terrible name, and proxy authorization for this one is a good one, and you should do that. And you should very much name the draft the way that Ben suggests, right in his last comment. Because that's what it is. It's channel-bound signature authentication, and you can maybe make it unprompted as well if you want to keep that word in the title. But to say anything about how 401 works would essentially be an update to 9110 that's unnecessary, because that document already says exactly what it needs to say for all of those things. And the idea that you may, in some circumstances, be able to take what is effectively a 401 from some other context, like room 401 over there, and move it into 402 over here, that's fine. but people can do that sort of stuff on their own without any help from us.
Yep.
And you don't want to get too broad a scope in this document. You've already got enough.
Yep, that makes sense. Thanks, Jonathan.
As mentioned, this is channel bound auth. I'm not sure how proxy authentication would be checked if you are doing channel bound auth, because the proxy doesn't have the right key. The server doesn't have the right key.
We have a section in the document about that.
Do we?
Jonathan, have you read the draft? This isn't Perl. It's not write only.
Sorry.
Two. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Mike, as quickly as you can.
I will +1 Martin's suggestion that this does not need to update 9110. The text that we need is already there, so maybe just quote that and observe that authentication can be sent without a 401, and you're using it in this case.
Awesome. Thanks. Is that the whole queue?
Yes.
All right, great. Sorry, this thing takes a while to reconnect. All right. So we have two issues. So when you do the TLS key exporter, I know I needed to find something very cybersecurity online. When you use the TLS key exporter, you pass in a label and a context. The context right now in the draft is empty. And folks have pointed out that we can and should use that to like kind of tighten what the application of these are. So for example, adding which algorithm we're using to that feels like it's the kind of thing, just put everything in the digest in TLS, like it avoids some class of hypothetical attacks and it has like no cost. So I think that's a good idea. Putting the key identifier as well, why not? Sounds great. Putting the origin, I think, makes a lot of sense because if you're like have multiple origins that you're talking to over the same HTTP connection, you might not want fade sharing on the authentication. Putting the full URL, though, I don't love, because then that means that when you have multiple requests to the same origin on the same connection, it would create a separate authorization header. And so it wouldn't be compressed by HPAC or QPAC anymore. So my proposal is to put in the first 3 bullets, but not the 4th one. How do people feel about that? I see some thumbs up.
Hi, Alex Shanowski. I thought I asked this before and I don't remember the answer, but like one of the problems we had with exporters is that it binds the connection and not the stream. And I'm not convinced, particularly for large CDN front services, that we necessarily want streams to all get the same key material.
So that's exactly what this is about.
Right, but why not include stream ID?
Well, stream ID at the HTTP layer is gross, but I don't see any value in that separation. I think separating it by origin gives you like a nice web security model property, but separating it by path or by stream ID is effectively the same. I don't see any value. And it means you're going to do a lot more work cryptographically and sending it.
I'm nervous about that because it feels really weird that you could have like, for example, a system proxy that say is using Envoy and allows multiple things to connect to it that will then be multiplexed onto some backend connection that would all get the same identifier for the same origin. I really don't like that.
Okay, but not liking it. What's the problem with it?
The problem is that you have a thing which is semantically in HTTP 1.1 would have been different connections and would have gotten different stream identifiers here, but behaves differently under H2. And that doesn't feel right to me. Because this behavior difference exists, I worry that it's an artifact that we can eventually have a security vulnerability against, and therefore my inclination is to guard against it.
Okay. Thanks. I can't see who's next in the queue.
So I just negotiated a jump because I wanted to respond to Alex. It's a nice idea, but it's impossible because a lot of times we construct requests without knowing what the stream ID is. So too bad.
Yeah.
So you were saying that like whatever choice you happen to make here, might have like interesting implications on like what the ideal security properties for this thing are. And so I was wondering, as you were saying this, like, what are the ideal security properties for this thing? And has there been like analysis done to demonstrate that whatever's in the draft, satisfies those particular properties?
The security person asking what my threat model is and if I've done formal analysis. You get a cookie. Anyway, my thinking of this was like meaning to be deployed on like origins on servers that only have an origin. Like this, the main use case I'm interested in is for mask, where your origin would be proxy.mask.example.org, and then it would be a bunch of connects, and the path would be different. Or connect UDP, where the path would be different, but the origin would always be the same. So that's kind of my mental model. In terms of analysis, could you help me with that?
Well, I was actually going to relay it to your co-author, who's sitting in the back. Jonathan, is this something that we could potentially do?
Jonathan says this is the plan.
Great.
To do the analysis.
So we're at time. So Kazuho, can you very quickly?
Sure. I think this might be a dumb question, but I was just wondering, now that we are moving to using the authorization header, would it make sense to use realm instead of URL?
To use what, sorry?
Realm. It's already defined for basic.
That's actually a good idea.
But then the scope of the header becomes different from authorization header.
All right, I'll take 30 seconds to talk about the next slide, but won't ask for questions here. I'll ask them on the list.
We can also give you time on Friday.
I have to go to CFRG.
Okay. All right.
All right, so I'm going to take 10 seconds to go over this one, but we can then talk about it later or on the list because we don't have time. Right now, we just signed the nonce with the signature. There was a proposal to add a context string next to the nonce to avoid people reusing the key across protocols. There was a response that like reusing the key across protocols is already a terrible idea, so we should just say don't do that. I'm inclined to do that. At the end of the day, it's kind of a bike shed. I think that doesn't change the system much, but if you care, comment on the issue. And that's it. Thanks everyone for your time, and see you on the list and the issues.
Great. Thank you, David. So that's it. We're done for today, and hopefully we'll see everyone on Friday. Thank you.
Thank you.
We should always leave more time for security related drafts. Shouldn't we? We should just learn our lesson.
We had a lot of time to do that, and we used it.
Yeah, we used to then more. Yeah. Yeah.
Right, we had gap time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We had. So on Friday we only have 10 minutes of gap, so that's going to be a little interesting. No, it won't.